ಕೊಡಗು ಧ್ವನಿ ಡಿಜಿಟಲ್ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ. ಇದು ಕೊಡಗಿನ ನಂಬರ್ 1 ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ ಚಾನಲ್.
So I was reading your book, and I came to know that I've read this in your first book as well, Splendors of Royal Mysore. Your journey as an author began with this. In fact, the inaccuracies that were portrayed in the serial, the Sword of Tipu Sultan. I think that was released in 1990-1991. And I don't remember much about it. I must have been 4 or 5. But I do remember that my family didn't like watching it. They didn't like the inaccuracies that were shown in the serial. So can you tell us more for the benefit of the audience?
Ellarigu namaskara. Very good morning to everyone. A great delight, an honor and pleasure to be here in Kodagu, and this has been possible mainly due to the efforts of our Honorable MP, Shri Yaduvir Vadiyar ji. And quite, significantly, I was telling him now that this is the last launch of the book, and the last stop had to be at a place which is so closely associated with the trauma, the tragedy, and the sufferings that all of you Kodavas have endured during the 40-year interregnum period of Mysore. That is the subtitle of the book. That was not, because of the person who has given the endorsement on the cover, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who uses words which are very difficult to understand or pronounce. But interregnum being, an interval or an intermission, where a regular government is usurped or taken away, and in its place you have a usurpation. That was the 40 years of Haider Ali and Tipu Sultan in Mysore, which brought in a lot of suffering, not only to the inmates of Mysore, but also Kodagu, Malabar, and also different parts, Mangalore and so on. Now, as you mentioned, Nitinji, I should somehow acknowledge Tipu Sultan for initiating me into becoming a historian quite perversely, because I was a boy of 12 or 13 then when the Sword of Tipu Sultan by Sanjay Khan came on Doordarshan, the only channel that we all saw those days, and Sanjay Khan was playing the lead role, as you would remember. And just to highlight Haider and Tipu in a good light, I think the Mysore royal family of the Wadiyars was shown in an extremely poor fashion. I'm sure some of the old timers here would remember the Maharaja of Mysore, Immadi Krishnaraj Wadiyar, was shown like this, obese man who's dancing along with the court dancer. The sagacious Maharani Lakshmi Ammanni Avaru was shown as, one of those typical vamps from an Ekta Kapoor serial, constantly conniving, conspiring against Tipu. And that upset, I think, the apple cart in various parts of Karnataka, southern Karnataka particularly, which was part of the erstwhile Mysore Samsthana. Now, even to this day, after so many years, the very testament that scion of the family has been chosen by all of you, even in democratic India, to represent you from this place, shows the amount of love and affection that the family has always had in the hearts of Kannadigas. In old Mysore, I think next to gods and goddesses in their puja room, you would have photographs of maybe Nalvadi or Jayachamraj Wadiyar or Shrikantadatta Wadiyar's photographs there. So Namma Maharajaru, that was the epithet that most of them, they are ours. And the foundations of modern Karnataka being laid by the progressive later Wadiyars, their illustrious divans. Somewhere I think it was an affront to all of that. And if you remember, the premier studio in Mysore had also caught fire, and Sanjay Khan's face had got burnt. And a lot of Kannada media, had all these gossipy stories that it was the curse of the Wadiyar for which, Sanjay Khan had to pay a price. Now, I must confess here that as a boy growing up in school, if there was one subject I hated the most, it was history. Most history classes meant, kneeling down outside, because I just could not memorize who succeeded whom, which war was fought in which year, who was whose husband and wife, and all of these completely extraneous details. But all these protests, all these various voices in the media, I think somehow rankled something inside me. My family had no connection that way to Mysore. I'm half a Tamilian, half a Maharashtrian. So I think destiny chooses you for something which you don't plan for. And almost on a whim, it was a initiated, a self-motivated, more importantly, self-funded exercise to keep going to Mysore, meet members of the royal family who were more than generous to share a lot of information. Also old timers, visit palace, archivists, all of this to collect information initially only about that one king and queen who were shown badly. Never with the intention that this will become a book someday or I'll become a historian. I'd never thought that. Serendipity or happy accident is all that it led to. Now, over the course of so many years, almost 10 years of collecting information about them, the interest also expanded to the entire dynasty. They ruled for 600 long years, one of the longest reigning royal houses in India. And sadly, there was not a single book in contemporary India, after maybe Haivardhan Rao and Wilkes and all these colonial writers, which covered this entire time period. So that was when I decided in 2008 to come out with my first book, Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Wadiyars, in which obviously there was one section dedicated to Haider and Tipu and the interregnum. And I really wanted to go deeper into that phase because that was a very decisive period of 18th century India. Now, I realized I was probably 26 or 27 when that book came out. I didn't know the sharks and landmines that Indian history writing actually entails. There was a lecture in Bangalore that I was giving on Tipu Sultan and Haider. I was actually reading out Tipu's own letters, to his generals and others. Go to Kodava, commit these atrocities, gloating over these, what he did in Calicut. We converted 4 lakh kafirs, was what he would write to his generals. Just as I was reading all this, coming straight from the horse's mouth, not my interpretation, suddenly a section of the audience, got very agitated. They started disrupting the talk. Paper rockets were thrown, maybe to test Tipu Sultan's rocket technology also somewhere at the podium. And the lecture had to be stopped midway. And, my father was sitting in the first row. And while I was ushered away to the green room, someone came to my father, some Tipu fan club or some such person, and he put a pamphlet in his hand and said, "You have an only son. If you want him to live long, please ask him to mind." The protesters had gathered right in the heart of Bangalore, at the newspaper office in MG Road, and they demanded an apology. Now, I said, over my dead body, I'm not giving an apology because all that I have written is based on facts. Now, to do something, they even burnt my effigy in MG Road. The editor of the newspaper actually sent me a photograph of that burning effigy. I made it my Orkut, that was a social media those days. My Orkut profile picture for a long time was the burning effigy, very badly made effigy, I must say. I was okay with it. I thought, okay, as they say, nazar utar gaya. But my mother, who kept very poor health, she extracted a promise from me that never in public you're going to talk about Tipu Sultan again. And obviously, if it's your mother telling you that, you have to follow it. And I kept the promise. Unfortunately, we lost her in 2018. And after that, I thought, the person you have made the promise to, if that person is not there, then the promise is also invalid. So I broke the promise. And that is how, after 15 long years of this idea marinating in my head, that's how I think so much suppressed emotion was there inside me that it spilled over 900 pages of this book. And that's how this book is out before all of you. Karnataka,
Yeah,
not
so it's part of,
I'm a proud
also,
Kannadiga,
yes.
though I may be whatever in terms of my family background.
Yeah, but the way you have depicted the history of the Kodavas during the reign of Tipu Sultan, that's been quite. You have done a tremendous job. It's a fabulous
Coming
job.
from you,
Yeah.
that's an added,
So I read this mention of the 2 brave leaders of Kodagu, Kuletira Ponana and Machaya. Like, we have descendants of those warriors in the crowd here. So, and then I also read about the mention of David Param. You have mentioned that as well. You have mentioned, you have referred C.P. Belyapasa's works, and you have mentioned the Maletrike temple So that has an interesting story. It's when Tipu attacked that place. It's the Kodavas. They went up to the temple. It's a hill temple, and it's said that the goddess came in the form of bees, and stung the enemies, the soldiers of Tipu, and they fled the place. So this is like you have recorded a lot of things about Kodava, and they're all to the point. So it's like you should be commended for all that. Also, you have also I have noticed in one place you have mentioned about the like there are various accounts which give various different numbers for the number of Kodavas who are captured or converted. So then you have given the range of that 40,000 to 65,000 based on different accounts. Like different people say different things. And also, you have mentioned that Muhaibul Hassan, he finds these numbers, he says these numbers are not accurate because he says that in the 1830s the population was much less. But then over there you have given a counter, you have mentioned another person, Gajanan Mandale. So what he says is that what Mr. Hassan is saying, it's not correct. You cannot predict the population of a region based on a future census. He gives the example of Poland, where Poland was the Jews in Poland. They counted something like 3 million in the 1930s, and after Hitler's persecution and all that, the number was 1 million. So that's a very reasonable argument that you have provided there. Like I have not seen this argument in other places, but also there's a lot of other context. There's otherwise also like the about the Kodavas, the history of the Kodavas. It's like I'm impressed by the information that you have collected and you have portrayed here, and it's like also you have provided a very balanced approach. You have provided both sides of the argument. Like when you have mentioned Sringeri, the plunder of Sringeri that happened when the Maratha Pindaris, they came and they plundered Sringeri. So at that point of time, you don't justify it. It's like you're showing both sides of the coin. You're saying that okay, this was a shameful act that happened, and Sringeri Mutt had to be honored, but in spite of that, this happened. So it's like you've done a very commendable job. And I was thinking, like, what is your routine like? How do you? Sorry, yeah. What is your routine like? How do you write? Do you spend certain hours writing every day, or do you keep a word count? What is it?
I certainly don't. I am quite a chaotic historian and writer. I think you get inspiration in spurts. And particularly when you're consumed by something for so long, 15 years, then, there's so much of archival information. And there were so many friends. Mr. Belliyappa, who's here, was my constant sounding board when it came to anything related to Coorg. I think he's been a chronicler of the place, and all his books, I think, bring out those hidden truths and memories of Kodagu which haven't yet come out in the larger mainstream, which Yaduvirji was mentioning. Just a context, I think a lot of people here know about Haider and Tipu and so on, but in case someone doesn't, Haider Ali bursts into the firmament of Mysore almost by accident. He was born in 1721 in Budikota near Kolar, and to Fateh Muhammad, who worked with the Nawab of Sira. And it so happens that the father is killed when the child is just about 4 years old. In fact, the astrologers are supposed to have predicted that this son is going to bring the death of the father. So let's kill him by poisoning him. But Fateh Muhammad actually resists that. History would have been very different, perhaps, had he done otherwise. And a 4-year-old Haider and his elder brother Shahbaz, who's 8 years old, are then captured by a person whom the father owed a lot of money to. And these people are put inside a kettle drum or a nagada and beaten upon to get the money back. And in that very pitiable condition is when Haidar's mother, Majida Begum, she runs away to Srirangapatna, and Dodda Krishnaraja Wadiyar is the Maharaja then, and she pleads with him, to take pity on these fatherless boys and to, help them with the money that they owed. Now the Maharaja, being benevolent, actually, paid off the debtors, and he also made a promise that when these young boys come of age, they will be taken into the Mysorean army. Now, little did he know what he was signing up for, I guess, because he kept his promise when both of them came of age. In 1749, Haidar makes his first appearance in the siege of Devanahalli, where he is under the tutelage of Karachuri Nanjarajaya, who's the Dalvai of Mysore. Between 1749 and 1761, in just a matter of 12 years, this man, twists every rule in the rule book, runs with the hare, hunts with the hounds, as they say. And while all the other players of 18th century India was a period of flux where there was conflict. There were the Marathas, there were the Wadiyars, there were the French, there were the British, the Carnatic wars that happened there, Hyderabad Nizam, the Arcot Nawab, all of them fighting constantly. The only person who benefited, I think, from all of this was Haidar. And he created such a situation, which you'll read in detail in the book, where he manages to overthrow the same benefactor who actually helped him in such a condition. And he becomes the Sarvadhikari of Mysore, or the supreme dictator. Now, Haidar Bhatt had a sense of realpolitik and strategy. He knew that it was a Hindu majority kingdom, and it was a Hindu ruler who had been so generous to him, and the people would not take this lightly. So he kept up the pretense of having a Maharaja on the throne. After Imadi Krishnaraja Wadiyar died, many, his sons and others who came to the throne, Bettada Chamaraj Wadiyar, Nanjaraj Wadiyar, all of these people, the minute they came of age or they began to have a mind of their own, very surreptitiously a glass of milk would go to the Maharaja's chambers, and the next morning a fit and fine Maharaja would be found dead with poisoned milk. And then the charade would continue. He would pick an infant or someone from the larger nobility and place them on the throne. By the time they came up to, came of age, again they would be disposed of. But all the trophies of war would be gone and submitted to the Maharaja, and all farmans would go out in his name, as if, he is being the most dutiful servant of the Maharaja. But everybody knew where the true power, of the kingdom lay. Now, this was how he managed to also consolidate and keep his kingdom by not assuming everything to himself. And by and large, a tolerant policy, even when it comes to religion. He didn't care much what faith people followed, as long as he had his power. I think the end is what all that mattered, the means did not. All of that changes when his son Tipu Sultan comes to power. He literally, has got the kingdom on a platter. His father worked so hard, did all his conspiracies and chivalry also to come to the throne. This man got it all on a platter, but I think a classic case of how hubris, how arrogance of power and lack of foresight and strategy can ruin someone. I think it's a case study to see how the father and son are a contrast to each other. And that's why about 1/3 of the book is dedicated to Haider Ali, because you cannot understand Tipu until you see him as a contrast or as a foil to Haider. Tipu disposed the Maharaja of Maharani Lakshmi Ammani, was put in house arrest. Mysore itself was Islamized as Sarkare Khudadad, the God-given kingdom. All places, names of places were changed. Even, I think, Kodagu became Zafarabad, Mysore became Nazarabad. So many, Islamization of names. Kannada was replaced. Kannada and Marathi, which were in the court language, were replaced with Persian in a part of the country which doesn't understand Persian. Coins with Persian numerals on it. He introduced his own calendar, the Maududi calendar, disposing both the Islamic calendar and also the Hindu Panchanga. So all these almost Tughlaqi farmans that you had, Muhammad, and he hurtles from one disaster to the other, as you see in just the 17 years that Tipu Sultan rules. And that is, I think, 2/3 of the book, which talk about how he starts on a high. He ends the Second Anglo-Mysore War by signing the Treaty of Mangalore on a great high. From there till the time he was killed in Srirangapatna on 4th of May 1799, it's almost like a Greek tragedy of how a man without foresight, without with this supreme arrogance, megalomania, very bloated self-image, hurdles from disaster to his own death.
So, are you suggesting that Haider Ali was better than Tipu Sultan?
I mean, if you have to relatively choose between the two, he was, of course, a very brutal man. In Kodagu, you have that horrendous, instance where when he attacks the second time, 1775, he announces, sitting maybe close to where we are here, 5 rupees for every Kodava head that is brought to him. And 700 heads have come and made their way to him. And that is when Wilkes talks about it, that 2 very beautiful young men, you Kodavas are so good looking and beautiful. So 2 young men, their heads come, and he sees them and says, oh, such lovely faces, so let us stop this beheading. So had they not been, those, good looking faces, this horrible act would have continued. Now, many people may argue that, this was a pre-modern era, and in war, everybody was cruel. No doubt. I mean, even the early Wadiyars, when wars happened, the common practice of cutting off noses and ears of opponents, all of those used to happen. That was those era. And in any war, common civilians are a collateral damage. We see that even now, what's happening in the Middle East or what's happening in Russia or Ukraine. You can't brush away, especially Tipu's bigotry, by just saying he was also cruel, just as all his other contemporaries were. Some people were more cruel than the others, and particularly when it is guided by, religious identity of the opponent, which very clearly becomes, evident in nothing else but Tipu's own letters, own, dream registers, his hatred for kafirs, or the non-believers who did not subscribe to the Islamic faith, and his invocation again and again of how the original faith, the true faith, had to be established. It leaves no doubt or no ambiguity in anybody's mind. I think that should be very, very clearly underscored. You don't see that kind of bigotry, at least within Mysore kingdom, when Haider ruled. As I said, he allowed so many things to happen. The Dasara procession also was happening in Mysore and so on under Haider. But we don't have any accounts of it happening during Tipu's time. So, what is a genocide? A genocide is a targeted, as the United Nations also, the Genocide Prevention Charter that it says in 1948, it says a targeted attack on anybody based on their identity, their religion, their color, sexuality, whatever, that is a genocide. And in that manner, if you take that as the standard, what happened in Kodagu, what happened in Mangalore, what happened to the Nayars and Thiyas in Malabar, all the northern Kerala regions, the Mangalore Christians, the Mandya Mayangars in Mysore, I think that definitely comes as a part of genocide. And it is quite outrageous that, we actually commemorate and celebrate such a person with the perverse things like Tipu Jayanti. What he did to the Mandya Mayangars, it's not some story, just as, the wounds of those massacres in Devatiparam or in Mangalore are there in all your hearts. These are intergenerational trauma. These are memories that have been passed on through oral, traditions. The Pattole Palame, all these things which actually capture the angst and the pain. This is not something that happened 200, 250 years ago and everyone has forgotten about it. The Mandya Mayangars to this day do not celebrate Deepavali when the rest of India celebrate it, because it was on Naraka Chaturdashi in Srirangapatna in the Lakshmi Narasimha temple, where 700 members, men, women and also children, who were stealthily asked to come for a feast. And while they were in the middle of eating, the temple doors were closed and elephants sent to trample everybody to death. almost very similar to what maybe General Dyer did in Jallianwala Bagh. But, lest you say someday we'll start celebrating General Dyer Jayanti also. I do not subscribe to the fact that, we should not talk about him in our textbooks and so on. And with due apologies, Yaduvirji, I think the BJP sometimes makes those positions which are very, I don't think that is correct, because they say let's erase him from history textbooks. You cannot wish away your past. The word itihasa itself means it thus happened. Idu hige aitu. That's all. There is no other ifs and buts. You just present truth as it is. You can mention him as an inevitable part of Karnataka's history, but to glorify him or to eulogize him and actually have his birth anniversary being celebrated only for appeasement of a certain community, I think that is being extremely disingenuous with history.
So, do you think there's any particular reason why certain communities and certain regions were targeted, like the Kodavas of Kodagu, the Roman Catholics of Mangalore, the Nayars of Malabar, the Mandya Iyengars? So, what was running in Tipu's mind?
See, I mean, we could say it was political, that obviously places like Kodagu or Malabar never succumbed to the Mysorean invasion. They constantly gave it back. Warrior class that is there here would not take it lying down that some sultan from Mysore is coming and capturing your place, commenting on the social customs here, trying to act as a reformer, assuming that there is polyandry here. I mean, the kind of words he uses for Kodavas in his lectures that he gives them, or even to the Nayars in Malabar. So you could say there was an uprising, and so it was political. Anyone who goes against the king, he tries to suppress. But that was not only it. As I mentioned earlier about this genocide, now the Mandya Iyengars, what was the fault of those children and women in that massacre? It was definitely on the identity. There were two Mandya Iyengar gentlemen, the Mysore Pradhans, called Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao, who acted as emissaries of Maharani Lakshmi Ammanni, carrying her messages from house arrest to the British in Madras, trying to negotiate, to defeat Tipu. Now, both Haider and Tipu tried to send their best armies to capture these two Pradhans, but they gave him a slip and somehow managed to escape each time. Now, because you could not capture them, so the entire community actually faces the brunt of what those two people did. Similarly, and why do you do that only on the day of Naraka Chaturdashi, which is an important religious festival for them? Then there is also, very clearly a targeting based on subduing the culture, religion, and faith of that community. Similarly, the Mangalore Christians. Now, the Canara Christians there, the people who were actually captured had little to do with what he accused them of. He apprehended that some of the bishops who were there in the clergy, they collaborated with the British during the Second Anglo-Mysore War when Mangalore was sieged. Now, when they heard that Tipu was attacking, all the bishops somehow managed to escape in their ships back to Goa. The brunt of all of that was faced by the common Canara Christians, who were probably laborers and farmers who had nothing to do with the politics. There also, varied numbers, 40,000, 60,000, 80,000 people, according to various accounts. Abbe Dubois, you have Barkur manuscript in Kannada, so many others. Dragged, literally tied to the feet of elephants from Mangalore to Srirangapatna, about 300 kilometers. Pregnant women also being forced to walk for kilometers and kilometers. Many of them delivering babies on the way, the mother or the child dying, and not even proper, funeral could be done for many of them. Jackals and dogs are feeding on their corpses. In fact, near Mangalore, you have the Nettare Kere. Nettaru in Tulu, I think, means blood. The entire lake who were dragged all the way from there. And when was this done? It was done on an Ash Wednesday, which was again a very important date in the religious calendar of the Catholic Christians, just before Easter, 6 weeks before that. So very clearly there too, the idea was subjugate them culturally and religiously. And they had to walk all the way. Whoever survived, if you survived, You had to convert. If you did not convert, your lips and noses would be cut off and you would be paraded on donkeys everywhere, most of them dying in the dungeons in Srirangapatna, whether it was the British prisoners or people from Kodagu or Mangalore. And in Kodagu, he goes a step further in 1785, just around the time of Devati Param. He writes a letter to his commander Zainul Abidin Shustri, who also wrote the military treatise called Fathul Mujahideen. Fathul Mujahideen. Mujahideen today too is associated with jihad, with a holy war on the basis of religion. So his library too had lots of books on what jihad is. And so where is the ambiguity there? I don't know. So when he comes here, the Kodavas beat Haidar's forces or Tipu's forces time and time again. Whether it's Fazlullah Khan who comes here or Burhanuddin, all of them are defeated. Even Shustri, who wrote a military treatise, in theory he was very good, but in practice I think the Kodavas beat him there also. And he had to go back. And Tipu, derisively calls him, effeminate men can only sit and write books. They cannot actually, act on the ground. But he writes a letter to him saying, not only the living Kodavas, but also the slain Kodavas need to be converted to Islam. Dead bodies too being circumcised and converted. You can, imagine the amount of perversity there. And talking about this, researching, writing, reading is not a pleasant task, obviously. And you also having been a chronicler of Coorg history, you know that these are very, very dark episodes. And so each time when contemporary politics plays in and you start eulogizing such characters, I think it deeply hurts the sentiments of communities whose ancestors have faced these kind of horrendous and unspeakable, tortures and brutalities.
Yes. So there is a mention of the Lavanis, the folk songs from the 1930s and the 1940s. And S.L. Bhairapaji has rightly countered it. He has said that actual history should be portrayed and we should not go to hearsay and all that. Also, there is a mention that these folk songs were made upon when certain merchants, they used to pay these folk singers, and then they were told to compose songs in praise of Tipu. Now, interestingly, there was one folk song in Kodagu from the 1800s on the war against Tipu. It's mentioned in the British Gazetteers, but unfortunately, it's largely forgotten. It's a lost piece. It's a song on the war against Tipu, the Kodava's war against Tipu. So all the atrocities that happened, all that was portrayed in that song. It was all depicted in that song. It was in the 1800s, and the British, they mentioned it. But today, after 200 years, it's lost. It's a lost piece. Coming back to the Lavanis, I feel that these Lavanis and also the Sword of Tipu Sultan, which was based on the novel, a work of fiction, these have done a lot of damage. Like they have, the actual history has not been brought out. The popular imagination has been that, okay, these people, Tipu Sultan and others like him are heroes and all that. But the actual, if suppose the Sword of Tipu Sultan was based on some historical work, I'm sure that it would have been done much better.
I think that was the reason why there were so many protests by even the Bombay Malayali Samajam. I think Kodavas too. The Mysore royal family, I know, of course, protested against the depiction of their family. A person like this in the serial, he's shown as a secular ruler who is allowing Vedas and Upanishads and all of that being read in his court. What sort of a travesty is that? Back pretty often. The whole glorification comes from this assumption that he was a freedom fighter. That's why he fought against the British. Now this is done by a set of historians. I would name them the Marxist historians, who also tell us all the time that till the British rule came, there was nothing called India. Bharat became India only after the British Raj was established. They gave us a sense of education, they unified us, they gave us culture, railways, hospitals. That's what we are told constantly. So if there was no nation, what nation was he fighting for? What freedom fighter was he? So you can't have it both ways, right? You either agree that it was an India already. East India Company was named by the Dutch, the French, considering that there was some entity called India. Now, if you call him a freedom fighter just because he fought the British, we should also remember that he was constantly taking French help to, defeat the British. And the French were no less colonial than the British. We saw what they did in the Carnatic Wars. It took us a longer time to free Pondicherry than it did for the rest of India. So by some strange stroke of destiny, had Tipu won, today I would be giving this talk to all of you in French maybe, because India would have become a French colony. And so, of course, with the French, he was sending these emissaries to the Emperor Louis XVI. Far-sighted vision that way, at least, that, instead of dealing with the local, governors in Pondicherry or so on, he's directly sent emissaries to Emperor Louis XVI. Of course, chose a very wrong time when the French Revolution was just brewing, and Louis XVI itself was later beheaded, and so was his queen, Marie Antoinette. The emissaries failed, but he was sending them, and constantly the thing was, you come and help me, flush the British out, and I'll support you. Now, with the French, he was playing to their rivalry against the British, but he was also playing to the larger Ummah or the Muslim Brotherhood on matters of faith. And there we see, right from sending an emissary to the Caliph, the Ottoman Caliph in Constantinople, saying, I am the true Muslim ruler of India. Even the Mughal has been discredited because he's under the control of Kafirs, the Marathas and the Jats and others. So I am the true Muslim ruler, and that is why, to show his true credentials as a Muslim ruler, these medallions that were stuck. I killed so many infidels, I broke so many churches, I broke so many temples. Though when crimes become virtues, then you're documenting it with a lot of pride that, I did this. And the Caliph actually gives him the permission to become the Badshah of Mysore. Because Tipu realized that he was a usurper, he was an illegitimate ruler. His father had usurped the throne from the Wadiyar, but that was not a hereditary transfer to the son. So all the contemporary players of the time, they used to mock at him, saying, you're an illegal ruler. He tried to, both father and son tried to, negotiate matrimonial alliances with the Nizam and others so that they can come up in stature. And the Nizam also rebuffs them. You may be Muslim, but you're of a lower class. You're not a royal blood. So constantly this, need for legitimacy, and the Caliph actually sends him a proclamation saying, I allow you to be the Badshah. And that is when he calls Mysore Sultanate Khudadad. He has a big throne commissioned for himself. Unfortunately, he could not even ascend the throne, because by the time the throne got ready, he was already killed. And to the other, the Turkey, whether it was the Persia, everywhere. And 2 years before his death, to the Afghanistan ruler, Zaman Shah of the Durrani family, clearly the letter that I have quoted states the plan that he had. You invade India, and a 2-year plan. In the first year, we shall flush out the whole of northern India from the Kafirs. There again, the constant reference to non-believers, to Kafirs, whether it was the Marathas, the Sikhs, the Jats and others who were there in northern India. Second year, we will flush out the whole of South India from the Kafirs, and then let us meet midway and divide the whole subcontinent among ourselves and establish an Islamic caliphate. Now, these are his own words once again. So as I said, either we would have been a French colony, or we would be a Muslim country, and all our names would be perhaps different today. So this is the idea of a freedom fighter, which again is very problematic. Anybody who fought the British, he was not fighting the British with any larger, idea that they are going to colonize us and so on, because as I said, he was taking French help. They were just yet another player in the larger chessboard of India. Just as he was fighting the Nizam, he was fighting the Marathas, he was also fighting the British. He was a brave soldier, no doubt on that. That he constantly fought, all his enemies, no doubt. That's a given. So those who say to the contrary, I think you're being again disingenuous with history. But an interesting fact is among the 4 Anglo-Mysore wars, 2 were fought by the father, Haider, where he decisively defeated the British. In the first Anglo-Mysore war, he goes to the very gates of Madras and makes the British sign a very humiliating treaty. In the second Anglo-Mysore war, you had instances like the Battle of Polilur, where both Haider and Tipu managed to inflict great reverses on the British. Colonel Bailey, with the Mysore rockets that they improvised upon, they managed to inflict a lot of harm. You had even someone like Sir Hector Munro, who was the hero of Battle of Plassey and Buxar, throwing all his weapons into a tank in Kanchipuram and running away to save his life in Madras. So all that is given, and the terror of Haider went all the way to London. It was discussed in the British Parliament, and the Court of Directors of the East India Company were quite alarmed as to what is happening in the southern province of India. But the 2 wars that Tipu fought independently, he completely was defeated by the British. He didn't win a single war against the British. In the third Anglo-Mysore war, half his kingdom was taken away. He had to pay a war indemnity of about 3.5 crores, for which he also had to give his sons, Abdul Khalik and Muizuddin, as hostages to the British. And of course, in the last Anglo-Mysore war, he was killed as a commoner in the fort of Srirangapatna. So if you actually see, even in terms of who actually gave a stronger resistance to the British and won wars against them, it was Haider and not Tipu. And so this whole thing that people say, the British demonized Tipu and that's how we get such an exaggerated version of his cruelty. Why would they demonize someone who they actually defeated and killed? They have very lauded, even on our program today. But so those who say this, they have quite laudatory things to say about Haider in their accounts, whether it is Wilkes also, or even much later Bowring, the Mysore commissioner, in his accounts. They say Haider never committed any political, harakiri when it came to the war, and he totally subdued us. They even talk about his so-called religious tolerance in comparison to others. So I think on a number of counts we have been lied to, that if not for the British demonization, this man was a great guy, or the fact that he was the first freedom fighter of India. I think these need to be countered, head on.
Yes. So I was reading S.L. Bhairappaji's foreword. He mentions that once he was part of this government textbook committee, and finally he was excluded from it because of certain ideologies. The historians, the other people, the other scholars in the committee, they belong to a different ideology, Marxists and others.
It's not so much about ideology, Nitinji. I think today, if you actually talk the truth, you're called a right wing. As if truth is, being something which is so, I think all knowledge is the pursuit of the truth. And the same thing Bhairappaji, I think, faced in the 1970s during the time of Indira Gandhi's government, where he said, why can't we tell the truth as it is? We should not talk about the temple destructions during the long 800-year Islamic conquest of India. Someone like an American historian, Will Durant, calls the Islamic conquest of India as one of the bloodiest tales in human history, not just Indian history, but human history. But we are not supposed to talk about it also. We are not laying the blame of that on any contemporary communities today. And that is very important to also underline. The Muslims of today are not responsible for what Ghazni and Ghori and Timur and Tipu and Aurangzeb and all these barbarians did. Not at all. But the converse is also not true. That, to ingratiate them, you did not have to whitewash the crimes committed by these people. Now, we openly talk about the crimes committed by the British. We talk about Churchill being a mass murderer of Bengal famine, 4 million. we don't think that time that the Christians of India are going to get offended if we talk about the crimes of the British, right? We openly, the British is the bad guy in all our movies and every popular media. But why, when it comes to talking about these, we somehow say, oh, let's not talk. We assume that the edifice of national unity will rest on the shaky foundations of whitewashed history, which will never happen. Because truth somehow has a way of finding its way, and at the first whiff of truth, the whole edifice will come crashing down. That is what we are seeing today, whether it is Ayodhya, whether it is Kashi, Mathura, Sambhal, all these places. We had the West Bengal government, 1989, Mr. Arun Shauri, in his book Eminent Historians, he quotes a government circular where the Marxist government of Jyoti Basu surveys all the textbooks of the time, school and university, and there's a detailed circular which has two columns. One is called Ashuddho and one is called Shuddho. The Ashuddho column says all this, the truth. Muhammad Ghazni destroyed Somnath, Aurangzeb did this, Tipu Sultan did this. In the Shuddho column, the government directive to them is, don't talk about this, delete this, let us not emphasize too much about this. So, if a historian is a chef, who cooks according to what the master's wishes are, he doesn't like salt, so let me not put salt, that is not true history at all. You talk about atrocities committed by the upper caste against the lower caste, that time you don't think that it's going to create a schism in Hindu society, right? We talk about it openly. It's something, history should also give us a space where we should learn from the mistakes of the past, which we should not repeat. It should also give us a space to heal. Now, when we talk about these atrocities today, today's communities get a sense of closure somewhere. In South Africa, you had this whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Desmond Tutu doing this Ubuntu, right, where the victim and the perpetrator of the crime see each other eye to eye, and the victim says, I forgive you, it is over. Here, of course, the victim and the perpetrator are both dead. But as I said, there is intergenerational trauma and memory that comes even to this day. The only way to say that is all this happened, today's communities are not responsible for that. Today's communities should not consider these people as their heroes or role models. This is over, let us make peace with our past and move on. As Yaduvirji said, if we need a Viksit Kodagu, if we need a Viksit Bharat, which is, I think, knocking on the doors of greatness, we need to get done with the past and not keep fighting. And I'm saying this as a historian, which is quite a irony in itself, but make peace with it and move on. Subterfuge, whitewashing, pushing things under the carpet, denial, not getting justice is one thing. Denying the incident of having happened is a worse insult, injury being added to that insult. So I think that is what Bhairappa ji, when he was asked by this textbook committee in the 1970s saying, let's not talk about all this, he took on the chairman head on and said, if I take my child to Hampi or Konark or any place, and my child asks who broke this or why was this broken, what do I tell them? His textbook is going to tell something else, that Aurangzeb actually gave grants to Hindu temples or Tipu gave grants and so on. But when they see this manifestation, what do we tell? And for that crime, he was actually taken away from the committee, and that's what he writes in his introduction. At 94 years, I think his spirit is still so strong that he still says we should fight for the truth, however inconvenient it is for anybody or politically incorrect.
So, we don't need to go back into the past. Even contemporary issues are going on. Like, for example, the persecution of the Hindus in Bangladesh. The Western media, they like to cover it up. They don't speak of it, they try to avoid it. So what should be the role of the historian? What is the work that's done and what is the work that needs to be done to ensure that there's justice? It's like there is truth is.
See, as I said, justice here, what can you do? Reclamation. My previous book on the unearthing the truth of the Kashi temple, which is now in court, despite this Places of Worship Act. In which civilization or free country you cannot fight for, legally also, you cannot, and in a peaceful manner, if your grandfather's house has been usurped by my grandfather. You don't even have the opportunity or the right to go to court and show the property document saying this is mine. In Kashi, you enter, you don't need an ASI survey there. The first thing you see is the broken remains of a 16th century temple that was built by Narayan Bhatt. And why did Aurangzeb do that? I mean, if he wanted, he could have demolished the whole temple and built a magnificent mosque. He did that, only the Gopuram of the temple was cut off, and in its place, 3 domes kept, and it was called a Gyanvapi Masjid. Gyanvapi, Sanskrit word which means a well of knowledge, is called Gyanvapi Masjid, which itself is a dichotomy. And every day, the Hindus of India, the Hindus of Kashi have to see that one of their most, famous Jyotirlingas has been reduced to this pitiable state, and they can do nothing about it. It is that attitude, what we talked here also. On Naraka Chaturdashi, you target somebody, or on Ash Wednesday. It is not just political conquest or everybody was cruel and all of that. It is the fact that there was a theological basis also for that. But I must also mention something interesting, that many people may then ask, how come so many temples are still there in southern Karnataka? Right? I mean, it's not become a complete, everything broken and mosques built there. I interviewed a very 80-plus-year-old scholar in Melkote, and he mentioned that in the long, reign of Tipu with so many wars, there was so much of uncertainty in his mind all the time. And so that made him give to a lot of superstitions. He also started believing in divine mechanisms, in astrology and so on. So these astrologers would give him all kinds of suggestions. So he is apparently was told by one astrologer that your rule will be, eternal if you don't desecrate 3 kinds of murtis or kallu. In Kannada, it was Yedda Kallu, Bidda Kallu, and Gund Kallu. So Yedda Kallu, a standing stone, meaning the Chalunarayan Swami in Melkote. Bidda Kallu, or the lying stone, which is Ranganatha Swami in Srirangapatna. Gund Kallu was the Shivalinga, the Shrikanteshwara in Nanjangud. Now, some other astrologer also told him that if you break any temple of Ranganatha Swami, then your end is near. So, if you see all over South Karnataka, you have so many temples with Biligiri Ranga, Kalyana Ranga, Hema Ranga, Beliyo Ranga. There's one Magadi Ranga outside Bangalore. If you see, the actual temple is not of Ranganatha, it is some other god, and they just place one Ranganatha Swami also in the periphery, so that when these armies come, oh Ranganatha, then I'm not going to go inside. It's almost, I shouldn't say that, but like a scarecrow to drive away this man's armies. And so, in fact, Maharani Lakshmi Ammani also used to write all her letters with the pen name of Sri Ranga. Maybe I think he's Sri Ranga, and then I'm not going to capture these letters. So there's a sense of psychosis also in this person, and the fact that he documented all his dreams. In fact, I believe every morning he was a very vivid dreamer, and every morning he would spend about 2-3 hours in his toilet sitting and documenting all the dreams that he saw the previous night. Of course, we have great playwrights writing dreams of Tipu Sultan, which is very different from the original dreams. I actually went to London to the India Office Library there and got the original written in his hand, which were accessed. Of course, it was, considering where it was written sitting, I was a little diffident about touching it. But then once we got it translated, I in fact even got those dreams psychoanalyzed by a psychiatrist, because dreams are the deepest subconscious mind, what it constantly thinks about. That is what the dreams are all about. Now, violent dreams, suddenly Prophet Muhammad or an angel or someone will come and say, go so far, break that temple, break this church. There's one dream where, he sees there is a pot or so, which has a lot of saligramas, the thing that Vaishnavas worship. Along with that, there are a lot of badami, also in the same pot. Now, in his dream, he's rotating this pot, and all the saligramas are becoming badami. Now he wakes up in the morning and he interprets it that
ಹೆಲೋ, ನಾನು ಕೊಂಡಿಜಮಂಡ ಪಲ್ಲವಿ ಸತೀಶ್. ಇದು ಕೊಡಗು ಧ್ವನಿ ಡಿಜಿಟಲ್ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ. ಲೈಕ್, ಶೇರ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸಬ್ಸ್ಕ್ರೈಬ್ ಮಾಡಿ.
ಕೊಡಗು ಧ್ವನಿ ಡಿಜಿಟಲ್ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ ಇದು ಕೊಡಗಿನ ನಂಬರ್ 1 ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ ಚಾನಲ್.